Up to about 3% of the total energy that we provide as a globe is actually used inside of our data centers. 40% of that power is actually used to cool. Pretty substantial amount of power if you think about actually just cooling the things that we want to actually perform a specific workload or do something for us. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the privilege and honor of coming up and talking to you for a few moments about liquid cooling in the data center. A very broad topic and one that I will not be able to do complete justice to in the time allotted, but again, would invite anyone who's interested to come by the booth at Lenovo, and I will happy to be talking to you a little bit more in detail about it. So before I go into any more detail, I want to see show of hands, how many folks here have already implemented liquid cooling in their data center? Anyone? There we go. Anybody looking at implementing liquid cooling in your data center? There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of things to think about as you go down this journey. All right? And it is a journey. And again, I've been lucky enough to be in the industry for over 20 years, and Lenovo has been doing liquid cooling now for over a decade. And it's really kind of evolved, right? When you first talked about liquid cooling in your data center, many folks were talking about trying to improve the overall performance that they would see from some of the applications they were running or some of the equipment they were running. There was also a conversation around what you could do from a sustainability aspect, right? But as we've seen over time now, that conversation has moved on to different things, such as what your data centers are actually capable of, what you can move from an air handling perspective and things like that. You've also got a total cost of ownership aspect to this, where I know many of you have seen your energy bills rising, right? And so obviously being able to use liquid cooling helps you be more efficient and helps from a TOC perspective. And then when you look at it from regulatory, a lot more regulatory things have come into play worldwide, where a lot of local governments are implementing different type of regulations on the data center to be more efficient. So now let's talk a little bit about the power aspect of this. Right? A couple things that I want to make you aware of that you might not be aware of right now. Up to about 3% of the total energy that we provide as a globe is actually used inside of our data centers. 40% of that power is actually used to cool. It's a pretty substantial amount of power if you think about actually just cooling the things that we want to actually perform a specific workload or do something for us. And then when you look at that, as you go out into 2030, that number is looking to actually quadruple, right? So power is going up significantly. And if you look at some of the things on reasons why we're seeing that type of increase, for many of you, this will not surprise anyone. You look at things like your CPUs going up from where we were a decade ago in the 145 watt range, now very easily seeing 5 up to 600 watts for your CPUs alone. Memory, the power for memory DIMMs is increasing, and we're using more of them. You've got the introduction of things like smart NICs, where you're seeing your networking go up from a power perspective, and you're seeing obviously the introduction of more and more GPUs into our data centers and different workloads. What that has done is now when you look at your server, your typical 2-socket server, we've gone from somewhere around 400 watts, again, about a decade ago, now to, on average, somewhere around 1,200 watts. All right? So again, as soon as you actually create or use more wattage, you're going to create heat. All right? So what that does is actually, from a fan perspective, actually take up the amount of actual wattage that you're using across that, and it goes up significantly, right? So the more TDP you have, The more heat you produce, the more power it takes to remove that heat from the server. Now, one of the things that a lot of folks don't actually even look at or even think about is, at the same time, a lot of the different silicons that are coming in the market, the T case is coming down. And so you need to actually cool that or keep that at a lower temperature range. So you're doing two things. You're increasing the heat that this thing is producing, and you're also now requiring it to stay at a cooler temperature. Right? So all of these things have actually taken the amount of power required to cool what we're doing on a day-to-day basis inside of our data centers significantly. Now, let's look at kind of why folks have actually started to go to the liquid conversation, right? You know, the good old days, back when we were somewhere around, 30 to 50 kilowatts, we've now very quickly entered a realm where 40 to 50 kilowatts is not unheard of, right? And now you're going into the realm of 90 kilowatts per rack. Some of the AI racks that are out there right now are very easily going up to 125 kilowatts. And as you come out and you actually look and beyond 2025 and out into the near future, you're talking 150 plus kilowatt, and some folks will even tell you that it'll be a megawatt per rack in the foreseeable future. So if you take those numbers and you just say, all right, on a 100 kilowatt rack, what do you need to do to actually cool that? So about 13% of the power that you're going to put into that 100 kilowatt rack is simply to move air from the front to the back of that rack. All right, so that's 13 kilowatts worth of power just to move cool air from the front, remove heat from the server, bring it to the back. Now, that's one piece of it. What a lot of folks don't think about is the actual piece that takes that hot air that's now removed from that server, and what do you do with it? All right, so if you look at it, it's about 30 kilowatts to actually remove that heat out of the data center on a typical crack unit that you would actually have out there in the data center side of it. All right, so you very quickly get to a point where you're at 43 kilowatts just to remove heat from that single rack, right? Now, if you look at liquid and where liquid is actually gone, you can take a CDU that will manage up to 400 kilowatts and actually remove that heat and do it with about 3.7 kilowatts of power to actually remove that. So that means that you, in essence, have provided 4x the amount of heat removal at about 10% of the overall amount of power it would take to actually do that. All right, so that's how liquid has played a role inside of the data center and what we're actually looking at from a cooling perspective. Now, as you start to talk about where we are from a standpoint of a lot of the GPU servers that a lot of folks are actually using for AI, right? Kind of some real world kind of projections that you look up here. We talk about the actual server itself, somewhere around 10 kilowatts on average from a server perspective. If you look at an air-cooled type of system, right, that is about 2 to 3 kilowatts just to remove the heat. If you take that same server and make it liquid, we actually have some examples of these inside of our booth, that takes it down about 2 kilowatts, somewhere thereabouts. So removing about 20% of the power that actually required to actually cool that system and operate it, right? Now, again, you got to think beyond just the server and what does that mean from a data center perspective. As you go out and you look at what we can do from a standpoint of liquid, saving the heat inside of the data center, that actually takes that down from about 15 and a half, 16 kilowatts, all the way down to about 9 to 10 kilowatts. Right, so a third power reduction on what you're doing when you're actually putting out some of these types of AI type of server applications and server systems. Right? So some real world kind of solutions that we've looked at from a customer perspective, where you looked at air versus liquid cooled. I mean, you've gotten all the way up to 78 megawatts for a deployment. You can kind of see what the deployment looked like. And the amount of power that was somewhere around 30 megawatts to actually cool that, when you look at it from a liquid perspective, the savings that you have from both the fan as well as the overall data center cooling perspective, that takes that all the way down to somewhere around 40 megawatts, and about 7 megawatts of that is for actual cooling itself. So again, if you think about the magnitude of what it costs you to actually run some of these applications and what it makes you, do from a standpoint of spending from an OpEx perspective, it's significant, right? Now, again, when you look at liquid, the conversation goes to not only what you can do with that server, but it also goes to what you're able to do from a cost effectiveness perspective, right? So that's some conversation around the power and what you're actually doing from a savings perspective. When you look at some of the other impacts that you will look at there, not uncommon to see articles right now, and you don't have to search that hard to see where people are writing about the amount of water it actually takes to actually cool these types of data centers, right? There's an example in one of the articles here where you're looking at almost 1 million gallons a day to actually cool a data center, and this is in Arizona, from the US, where I'm from. Now, for anyone who's familiar with Arizona, it's not known for how much water it actually has, and so that's significant. So they say it's probably about 300,000 gallons will do about 3,000 homes in the US, right? So you can think about the number of homes and how much water that actually is doing and consuming from a data center perspective. Things out there around water rights and the ability to actually get water and fresh water and sustainable water is actually been kind of top of mind in a lot of the news articles that are out there. So as you look at kind of your journey down this liquid-cooled kind of solution, right? Many folks have gone and actually implemented liquid with a chilled water, evaporative cooling. In essence, taking your water, cooling it down to 23 to 25 degrees C, and using that to actually cool your systems. Again, what we've actually looked at and what we've worked on for a long amount of time, is probably over a decade, is actually using warm water cooling. The ability to actually cool these components with water up to about 45 degrees C. When you go to a conversation around 45 degrees C liquid and actually using that water, you can go to a dry chiller where you're actually able to not use the evaporative type of cooling that you need out there, and it saves you a significant amount of actual water usage, and it will take that down. Now, what that does is you use less water and you use less power because you don't have to chill the water, right? So again, some of these conversations as you start to look out and plan on where you want to go from a liquid cooling perspective, these are certainly one of the areas where you want to actually think through and talk about with whoever you're actually working with around how you can implement some of these types of solutions. Now, one of the things that I'll leave you here with today is, again, a couple of other ideas or thoughts about what you want to look at as you're going down this journey of liquid cooling, right? When you look at it from a standpoint of environmental, right, there are several different options that you can look at on how you actually, or what liquid you can use to cool these types of systems. Lenovo has been primarily working with actual just straight up water. So the ability to actually use water takes the conversation of the glycol out of that. And again, if anybody's looked at glycol and how you actually have to manage it, it is an environment or a substance that you actually have to manage. Water, very easy to actually get rid of. If you have to clean something up in a data center, very easily to get rid of it. We use water in all of the solutions that we actually put out. Now, using water also helps from a standpoint of what you can do from your CDUs and your pumps, the ability to actually lower the pressure because you are using just straight water, helps from that perspective, providing you with better maintenance and ability to actually keep those pumps up and running, as well as less power. There's less actual droppage in your flow rates, And so it makes it a little bit more consistent from that perspective. And then, again, some of the ideas around when you're talking to the folks that you're working with from a cooling perspective, talk to them about the materials that they're actually using to actually implement these things, right? The last thing that you want to do is actually go forward and put an investment in around liquid cooling without understanding what the materials are that are actually being used to do that, right? Things like the ability to actually use 500 PSI hosing, making sure that you're using copper, that you're not using things that are nickel plated, things like that. All of these things are things that we've worked with across the years to make sure that we actually have the experience and background and knowledge on how to implement these things in the right way to do them, right? And then ultimately, what you're looking at from a standpoint of your testing and making sure that when you get these systems, that they have been tested, they're not going to leak. For example, we will test everything out of our manufacturing facilities. We will run water through them, make sure they do not leak, and then we will actually fill them with helium before they go out and make sure that the pressure actually holds so that you will not see any leaks when you go forward and actually put them into your data center. One of the things that, again, as I've talked to customers over the years, one of the big concerns is always, all right, what happens when you put water in a data center, right? Well, the big thing is it's easy, don't make it leak. Keep it where it's supposed to be, no one has to worry about it, right? So again, as you're going through this is a very broad and vast topic, right? There's a lot of components in this thing that you need to think about. So we welcome you to come over, visit the booth that we have in our exhibition hall. Happy to talk you through some of the benefits, some of the areas on how you would actually do these types of introductions into your data center, and really walk you through the journey. So with that, I want to say thank you and appreciate everybody listening, and hope to see you at our booth. Thank you.